So it's almost been 2 years now since the National Association of Realtors just flipped the real estate industry inside out and started requiring buyer's agents, so agents representing buyers, to have a buyer representation agreement signed with each buyer. So buyers are now having to actually sign an agreement with an agent to represent them in a transaction. Now, I've always felt this was a good thing. This is a good thing for the real estate industry. Great. It provides transparency, and it also shows commitment between an agent and between a buyer. And also think about it this way: before this, buyers were literally hiring agents based a lot of times on who happened to be hosting the open house. Okay, great. You can write an offer for me and represent me. Or they've been hiring agents based on which agent brings me the house that I end up liking in an email. I mean, it was like the wild, wild west. Any agent was able to get paid based on whoever the buyer happened to just want to choose. I mean, it was like the wild, wild west. Now, with these changes, there have been now a couple, issues that have been coming up. So I think this is why I wanted to make this video, because I think it's really important to share with sellers, share with people that are listing their homes, and really be transparent and explain to them some of the changes now on that are going to affect them. So now let's give this, pretend situation. A listing agreement is signed with the seller at, let's say, 5%. 2.5, 2.5. Let's make it simple. So 2.5% to the listing agent and 2.5% to the buyer's agent. But now, since August of 2024, all that has changed. Now, a listing agreement is only really between the seller and the listing agent, and only compensation between the seller and listing agent is listed on there. There's no section that tells the seller if there's an agent represented by a buyer, if there's a buyer represented by an agent, you're going to have to pay this much to that buyer's agent. There's no section like that anymore. So that means that agreement only shows the seller how much they are paying. Now, here's what a lot of listing agents are doing. They're also informing sellers, hey, you may likely have to pay another 2.5% or 2% to an agent being representing a buyer. And we do that in the form of BRBC and in the form of a seller concession, where with an offer, the buyer's agent is saying, hey, this buyer needs to pay me 2.5% because that's my agreement with them. We would like you as the seller to give 2.5% to the buyer as a seller concession so that they can compensate me as their agent. That's baked into the purchase offer. But what happens now if there's no buyer's agent? Let's say that agent or that buyer is coming directly to you as a listing agent saying, I want you to write an offer for me, or I would like for you to represent me. Now, that's a little bit different. Actually, that's very different than an unrepresented buyer as well. So if they're going to use you as the listing agent, but also to represent them, then we need to have a buyer representation agreement with that buyer as well. Now it's two. It's just because there's dual agency doesn't mean that you as the agent, don't have to have a listing agreement and a buyer's agreement. You got to have both. We do it the same way. Concessions work the same way. But here's a situation. Now, here's a scenario for you. A buyer comes and wants to write an offer on your home, but wants to be unrepresented. Doesn't even want you to represent them as a buyer's agent because they don't want to pay the buyer's, agent anything, or even be obligated or sign a buyer representation agreement with an agent. They want to be an unrepresented buyer because their good friend is an attorney. As the attorney said, I'll offer to help you out with this one. Maybe just give me a couple $100, but keep that commission or use that towards your own closing costs, or let that just help you get a better deal on the house. So here you are as a listing agent selling the home for, let's say, $1 million, 2.5% commission to you on the listing side. That's $25,000. Then there's a buyer that says, I want to be unrepresented. I don't want an agent. I don't need an agent. My attorney friend is going to look over everything for me and help me on this. So now you have two issues here. The buyer thinks that they're going to get maybe a discount, maybe a reduction of about 25,000, 2.5%. They're going to get a price reduction or a credit because there's no buyer's agent that needs to be paid. And the seller also thinks, awesome, I'm going to save $25,000 on this. I don't have to pay a buyer's agent, but I want you to look at what the listing agreement actually says. Now look, right below this part here where it says the commission that you are charging as the listing agent, right below that is also another number, a commission that they are obligated to pay you if there's an unrepresented buyer. And it's important for sellers to know this so that there are no surprises with how much they end up having to pay. But also it's important for buyers to understand this so that buyers are not just trying to cut corners and get a discount. Buyers are out there thinking, if I don't have an agent, I can get a better deal on this home. When in fact, actually, if they don't have an agent, the listing agent might be making as much as double the commission, double the compensation. And think about it this way. If a listing agent who actually represents the seller, not you as the buyer, they represent the seller, okay, and you're unrepresented and you're under contract, and there's some disclosures, there's some things that are with the home that need to be disclosed, there's some issues with the home, but the listing agent knows now that you're unrepresented, they can make as much as double the compensation. How committed or how motivated do you think that listing agent will be to disclose everything they need to disclose, even if it may kill the deal? It's a really important question to ask. I mean, I'm not saying that every listing agent out there is going to be dishonest, but their fiduciary duty is towards the seller, not towards the buyer, because they are not representing the buyer. So that's important to make sure that buyers understand this. Just because you go directly with the listing agent or you're not being represented by an agent doesn't mean that you're, all right, I'm saving so much money, the seller is going to reduce the price now or give me credit. And let's face it too, think about it this way. If a seller is going to save money or they think they're going to save money on a situation like that, why would the seller pass that savings on to you, a complete stranger, a buyer? All they're thinking about now, I would say, is awesome, I'm going to make even more money on this sale than I originally anticipated. Wow, that's even better for me. And they're looking at it as keeping that money, and now they're going to walk away with more profit. So keep this in mind as you're having these sort of conversations with your buyers that are objecting to having you represent them as a buyer's agent, and buyers that are saying, well, why don't I just go unrepresented, or why don't I just go directly with the listing agent? And on the listing side, you want to have these conversations with sellers so they understand what an unrepresented buyer actually means.